I'm here with Mario from CHGO Blackhawks. Everybody knows it. He's a legend around my area. So, how you doing today?
Good, good. We were just wrapping up. You're saying you got a busy day today. I've had one too. I've done this will be the fourth show and recording I've been doing today. It's been a busy one. So but I'm excited though. This is the busy time of the year. It's gonna grind to a halt probably by mid-July. So I'm happy to be busy now.
Sure, for sure. I have a couple trips delayed until like July 16th. I'm really excited for
Yeah,
those because, you just go to the end of the draft season and it's just a different cycle. Then you have the season, but you got a little break in the time. So, I
right.
just wanted to ask you about like obviously the Ryan Donato thing happened today, but just for audience members and everything, can you tell me your story and your passions outside of, doing this and what got you really started?
Yeah, so I've always been passionate about sports since I was a little kid, and um, didn't really know exactly what to make of that. I figured out early on professional athlete was not the path I could go down, but I always liked, I grew up with like the what I consider the heyday of Sports Center, so I always wanted to do something like that. Like I always wanted to do like TV or radio, and um, when I got into college, got into UW Whitewater's TV and radio program, and got a lot of experience with that, especially on the sports broadcasting side, and got into writing too a little bit. And then outside of college, started working at a sports radio station in Milwaukee, Sports Radio 1250. And where it kind of narrowed down into where I'm at now, kind of focusing on hockey, is at the time, the station that I was working for was the broadcast station for the Milwaukee Admirals. So there was an opportunity to kind of cover the Admirals as like a quote unquote beat reporter for the station. So I took that opportunity and kind of ran with it, and eventually parlayed that into an opportunity to write about the Hawks. Started with Blackhawk Up, moved to Second City Hockey, the rink, and then eventually with Bleacher Nation, and then turned into CHGO. So just kind of kept my options open, kept grinding at things. It wasn't until Bleacher Nation just a few years ago when I started there that I was actually like making money doing it. So treating it like a full-time job, but obviously making it work when I could. And then yeah, just it turned into those opportunities, and I'm really grateful for them. But yeah, I mean, as far as passions go, sports is at the top of the list. It's definitely changed in the last 3 years since I had my daughter. Like my family outside of my work and everything like that is something I put a lot of time and effort and passion into. And it's been a different type of path in life, but it's something that I really it's super rewarding. And I know for a sports podcast, it's maybe not the thing you hear the most that people are passionate about, but I mean that is something that it just I'm always thinking about family, working to make my family's life the best it can. And but the other things I'm passionate about. I love music. I play the drums. It's been a while since I've actually played, but it's something that I miss a lot because I just don't have the space in this home for my drum kit. But that is something that I really do have a passion for. Is just enjoying music. Live music is one of my favorite things. So anytime I have an opportunity to like go to a concert, stuff like that, like outside of the sports world, those are two things that I just if I could do something outside of it, maybe something in music, I think would be a lot of fun.
I mean, that is awesome just to hear about your passions and your story. I like to ask, I had on Ben Pope as well as um, Powers, and none of them are Blackhawks fans. So I'm excited to actually get to talk to a Blackhawks fan. I mean, Scott Powers grew
Sure,
up in Chicago,
sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean,
right?
I know a little bit of Scott's background wasn't in hockey, and then he got the opportunity to it. And yeah, I mean, Ben's been around, but it's interesting perspectives. I mean, it's definitely different being from, I would say, from outside, your core of being a fan of the team that you cover. It definitely gives you a different scope of it. But I mean, it's all completely valid, and the work they do is incredible, fan or not. Like, I mean, it's they're two of the best. So
Yeah, they're next level. I mean, just the scoops, the insight they have, everything is. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, the Ryan Donato signing. My name's Donati, so I love that we signed Donato because it just,
perfect.
allows me to continue to get those texts from my friends. But yeah, obviously an incredible contract, 4 year, 16 mil. We signed Brian Bickle to that in 2013, so kind of a throwback
That's
there.
right.
So, can you tell me about that contract and just what your thought was when it popped up on your phone?
Yeah, I mean, my initial thought, I mean, I had reserved myself to the idea that Ryan Donato was gone. I had thought that, once the trade deadline passed and he wasn't moved, that it would be quick, that it would be like, okay, you weren't traded, let's get an extension done. And as more time went on, I just kind of more, and especially after the season ended, and it was just like, you could announce this deal at any time, and it just wasn't happening, and it just kind of felt like he was going to go to the free agent market and see what he was going to get out there. And the original reported offer was 3 years, 4 million, and it comes down to now it's 4 years, 4 million. Like, if that was the sticking point, like, that's super easy to get over. Like, I think, it's I said it today on the emergency pod that we did for CHGO. It's a perfect deal. Donato gets the the term that he had been hoping for, a little bit more longer term, a little bit more stability. He gets a raise, but it's also team friendly because it's not 5 or 6 million like he might have been able to garner on the open market. It's 4 million, which even now for Ryan Donato, that feels fair. And if he continues to be even 80% of the player he was this past season, where he had a career year, you're still getting him for the right money, if not a bargain. And as the salary cap goes up, 4 million is going to be almost nothing. So I think it's a really solid deal for Donato. It's a really good piece of business for Kyle Davidson. And honestly, like, I think, it may not make a big difference, but I definitely think it makes the path of this offseason obviously a little bit more clear, because that was kind of the first question mark outside of, like, oh, who are they gonna pick, or who are they gonna sign as a free agent? It was, well, can you get a deal done with Donato? And now that that's done, it's kind of like you go down the checklist. Now you get that out of the way, and it kind of gives you more of a path through the offseason where you don't have to go into July 1 free agency still wondering about what's going to happen with Donato. Like, you have that piece of business done. So I think it's just a really good scenario for everybody. I think clearly it shows that Donato um, likes to be in Chicago, believes in the direction that the team is going. And I think that's a good sign for, maybe other free agents or other guys that, might be talking with the Blackhawks, is to see someone who could have got maybe more money on the free agent market decide to stay in Chicago for what I think you could say is a discount. Um, so I think that that's probably a sign that benefits the Blackhawks, that, like, hey, the people who are here and are in it believe in it. So maybe that might send a message to people on the outside, like, hey, maybe there is something to believe in here, and it's not all doom and gloom as some narratives might present it to be.
Yeah, I want to just like dispel those rumors because the Blackhawks obviously have incredible prospects. We are next up, in my opinion, in the next 2, 3 years. Obviously, the timeline was a little uncertain, but I mean, look at our prospect pool. Is there a certain like off-season wish list or a realistic wish list that you think that the Blackhawks are going to accomplish this year? I know Marner's a big one, or I know Sam Bennett, or I mean, just Ehlers, but do you think that it's going to come more from a trade, maybe the third overall pick, or from free agency?
I don't think they have big plans for free agency. I think as this summer has gone on, I just don't think the realistic path is to overpay for a guy, just to convince them to come here. And I think while Marner is worth the money, I just don't think that they are set on him being that kind of guy. And I think realistically, the timeline for someone like him is maybe a year too early. Like if we were talking about, you know, the free agent class of 2026, and the guys that are on that list, the pipe dreams of, if McDavid hits free agency. But I mean, like, more realistically, if Kaprizov were actually to hit free agency, I feel like that's more or less the time to strike. But you still benefit from having a guy like Mitch Marner. Like, he's not a detriment to your team as much as some people might paint him to be. He's not. He's a guy capable of 100 points. He's a guy that can play, defense to a Selke, nomination level. And yeah, when it comes to the playoffs, like, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of guys that go, go quiet in the playoffs from time to time. And he's not much different, but there are times when he shows up in big moments. But I think realistically, the biggest move that probably will be made is a trade. And, I know there's been a lot of talk about moving the number 3 pick, and primarily Frank Saravalli has been the one banging that drum, whereas Scott Powers has kind of been the one saying the opposite. And I'm kind of like, I don't really know which direction to go with that kind of information, because we know clearly Frank Saravalli over this past year has become way more in tune with the Blackhawks because he's on CHSN. He's here a couple times a year, but Scott's also plugged in as much as maybe the most plugged in on the beat, and he's rarely wrong. So it's hard to gauge kind of where they're going to go and how splashy they might be. I tend to think that Davidson doesn't move the number 3 pick. And if he's not doing that, it probably is going to be a little bit trickier to get guys like, that have been in the trade cycle, like JJ Peterka, Marco Rossi, Jason Robertson, guys like that. Those should be the trade targets. I just don't know if it gets done without the number 3 pick. And I'm also not super comfortable moving that number 3 pick for a guy at that level. Like, those are all really good guys, but I also don't necessarily put them as like they are the top elite players that you want to give up a number 3 pick for.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like the names that we've heard, I mean, even Svechnikov, Jason Robertson, some of these other guys that I've heard, it's just really interesting because obviously a cornerstone player is who you probably draft at 3 overall. We've heard Anton Frandel, Desnoyers, Porter Martone, and a little James Haggins, but he's outside looking in at this point. Who do you think the Blackhawks would take, and who would you take if you were at the head of the seat?
I think they're going to take Anton Frandel. And I go off of that because the aforementioned Scott Powers this time last year was the one saying, oh, they're probably going to take Levshinov, when I think a lot of people, the majority of Hawks fans, were saying, no, take Demidov. And I think he's the one that's been slowly but surely pointing towards, I think they're probably going to take Anton Frandel. So look, the entire time over the last month plus since the draft lottery, since we knew they were landing at number 3, and it outside of a blockbuster trade where they move up to most likely number 1, Michael Misa's off the board, I would imagine, either going first or second. So you kind of look at, okay, what is in the mix after 1 and 2, and Matthew Schaefer is the top prospect on the defensive side. Michael Misa is the top prospect on the forward side. They're not going to go with a defenseman at 3. There's no one worthy of it. So you look at, okay, the next 3 or 4 forwards, who's all there? Take your pick. Each one of them has a skill set that the Blackhawks would benefit from. And I think they're going to go with Frandel. I'm totally okay with that because he has the size, he has the ability to play center and wing. He has a high level shot. The biggest knocks on him are some inconsistencies in his play, and that he didn't have a stellar U18s. Not everyone blows away every tournament, and for a guy that put up the most points for a U18 player playing in the Allsvenskan since William Nylander, I think you can afford a game or two where you might not notice him all that often, especially when he's an 18-year-old playing against men. So I like Frondell. I think there's a lot to like about him. If it were me, I think Porter Martone is a slam dunk pick. I think he's a guy that, you know, the perceived, below NHL level skating, or what, however you want to categorize it. I think his skill set outweighs what you would say is like poor skating. And I know, and the Blackhawks clearly value skating, and guys that can be fast, like guys that can move, be agile. I think and that's all valid, and they have a ton of guys that have that, but they don't really have a guy that you look at it as like Martone, where it's like no doubt he'd play in your top six. He has first line potential. He has a frame that can play a heavy style, but he also has a skill set that doesn't have to rely on him being a bulldozer. Like, he can use his frame to his advantage while also having some of the best hands in this draft class, a really good playmaking ability, really great passer. Like, I get a lot of like Blake Wheeler vibes from him, and I think he's a guy that, down the road, not too far down the road, you could even envision him playing really well off of Connor Bedard, because if Bedard is going to start focusing more on, taking more shots, using his high level shot to his advantage, what better way than to pair him with a guy that can create space and get him the puck? So if it were me, it'd be Porter Martone. But again, like I said, like any of those top 4 or 5 forwards, I'm completely fine with any of them.
Yeah, I mean, I got to talk to Porter Martone multiple times this season. He said that Connor Bedard was the best player in the NHL under 23 over Macklin Celebrini. I really liked that. Obviously, his first three strides are tough, but I asked Chris Peters about this. 4 years ago, Porter Martone was one of the worst skaters he's ever seen. I mean, now his skating is almost he's gotten so much better. When you put him in an NHL facility with NHL coaches or in the NCAA, they're going to fix that very quickly. This guy's not a slow skater. He gets you from point A to point B. I kind of compare him to like an old-timey car. It takes a little while to get off the line, but once he does, he'll get you to point A to point B. I really like him, like you said, incredible vision, incredible playmaking, really great hands, more soft skills, so he doesn't have that meanness like his comps as Corey Perry and Matthew Tkachuk, but he would also be my pick. I like James Haggins too, but he is under 6 feet. He's a little more built than I had imagined when I had my sit down with him at a coffee table right next to Ben Pope and Day Nourier. So I kind of thought that was funny. We were both
Nice.
talking almost at the same time. But the thing is, like, there's a lot of good options, like you said. Um, sorry, my dogs are very interested in Day Nourier, but I would say like I love all the options that you gave. I think the fans are really going to like that answer. Um, the entire draft is split. And actually, when I had Scott Powers on yesterday, he actually kind of poured water on the Anton Frendel. I guess the Hawks are going to meet next week early and have their final meetings. But he said that Porter Martone is still in the race. So that made me happy as a Porter Martone person. So I'm glad that you had him first too, because I want Porter Martone. Perfect fit with the Blackhawks. Perfect fit with Connor Bedard. But just for the 25th pick, um, Vaslav Nestrasil is one of those players that could go 25th. His camp actually reached out to me and said that they had dinner like 2 weeks before the combine or a couple of weeks before, and then they met at the combine early, and there's serious interest there. Do you think that the Blackhawks are going to probably take size with the first two picks with a 6'6" winger in Vaslav Nestrasil, or is there another target that you haven't?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with size is, I and I don't want them to just say, "Oh, okay, because you're big, we're going to take you," kind of thing. Like, I want there to be, leave that for more of like the later round project picks. Like, we've seen them do that before, and some guys have panned out, some haven't. But I think if you want to have some size up front, you got to do it with guys that also bring something else. Like you like with I look at when they picked Sacha Baudelaire last year. Like, he's a guy that's got some size, got some meanness to him, but he's also super skilled. Like, just watching him last year at North Dakota, like, you saw that skill that he has. Like, he seems like he's going to be a great all around guy. Um, so I hope that they are, if they are targeting size, it's not just size, it's size plus. And Nestrasil is a really good example of that. Like, I think he's a guy that a lot of people have been talking about. He's a guy that has those complementary skills along with the frame and the size that works. At 25 for me, two names have really kind of stood out, and one I think has a higher chance of being at 25 than the other. The one that I think won't be there is Cullen Potter of out at Arizona State. He seems like a perfect Kyle Davidson fit. Sure, does he not have the ideal size? That's whatever, that's fine. But he is, regarded as one of the best skaters in the draft class. He has a high end offensive ability. I think he's a guy that really has kind of climbed draft boards as we've gotten closer to the draft. So I like him at 25. I don't know if he'll be there. A guy that I originally didn't think was going to be at 25, but now is, kind of gauging the public sphere as we get closer to the draft. Kind of feels like he might have a higher chance of being there is Malcolm Spence. I really like his two-way game. He's another guy that's, got the ideal size, about 6'3", 200 pounds. So take or leave, but he's got, good offensive ability, good two-way guy. I think there's a lot to like there. And one thing that Davidson has emphasized with his draft picks over the last 3 years has been high character guys. And I think when you talk about Malcolm Spence, like the character is there through and through. So if he's there at 25 and they actually use the pick, I would be very happy with Malcolm Spence.
I like that you said Malcolm Spence. He was actually the Erie Otter guys were all great. Matthew Schaefer and Malcolm Spence were my two favorite interviews that I got to talk to. And there's just like this aura with Malcolm Spence. And he's also a playoff player. He played obviously with the Erie Otters with Martin Misiak. So those two are friends too. I asked Martin about that as well. Uh, Colin Potter, to just talk a little bit about him, the NCAA guys are a lot thicker than I thought, like muscular. And Colin Potter had enormous arms. His upper body is enormous. For a smaller guy who is an incredible skater, I was actually impressed with how filled out his frame was. So I would love Colin Potter. I think that he's flown under the radar for very long, but his skating is not going to keep him probably to 25. But like you said, Blackhawks love skating. I would love Colin Potter there. Is there like your favorite prospect in the prospect pool that you just think goes overlooked a little bit, or one that you just love watching?
A guy I love watching is Samuel Savoie. I think, it's a lot to put on a guy to kind of, put him in a box of like, oh, he's going to be Dave Bolland or he's going to be Andrew Shaw. Like those are, both of those guys won 2 cups. Both of those guys, were integral parts to that dynasty run. So it's lofty expectations, but I do see a lot of those traits that those guys have in Samuel Savoie, and I think he knows that that's going to be his path to the NHL. And so I enjoyed watching him in Rockford this year. Anytime you talk to him, like he's just a fun guy to talk to. So I have high hopes for him that he can reach those levels and get to the NHL and play that role. Because you talk about, needing power forwards and guys with size that can, be hard to play against. He doesn't have the size, but man, is he going to be hard to play against when he fully like matures physically and gets his game rounded out the NHL level. I really think he has just the mentality to play that style. And that is one of the things that is hard to it's hard to have in the NHL. Like everybody wants to have a guy that's like Matthew Tkachuk or Brad Marchand, but those guys that's a personality trait. Like that is something that is just genetically wired in them to not only have the skill level that they do, but also to play the mental game and to play that physical style and be able to get under people's skin. And I feel like Savoie revels in that part of the game. He just loves to be able to do that. And he also has a skill set that can back it up. So he's a fun guy to watch for sure. One guy that I think a lot of people like are excited about him, but we just don't know a lot about him is Roman Kanserov. And I'm just fascinated to find out if he comes over to North America, which I think he will. I think he's probably of any of the Russian guys that they've had in the last few years, he's the one that feels the most likely to actually come over and play. And just what he did in the last few seasons in the KHL and to play the role that he did, like that's impressive for a guy of his age in that league. I'm very interested to see what happens with him. I think it's what is it next, not this season, but next, obviously not this
2026.
season, but
Yeah,
yeah, next
27.
season is when they're kind of targeting that to happen. Like I'm very interested to see what he ends up being.
Yeah, I asked Scott Power about this yesterday, and he gave me a great clip that I posted on X, and he thinks he's coming over too. I mean, I've a lot of people that I know talk to Roman, and he's like, I want to come over. I don't want to play in Rockford, but I want to come over for sure. And I always get a chuckle up. He's a great person, very active with all these Blackhawks fans. He's coming over for sure, in my opinion. And obviously, I think so. Today I had a hot take hockey on, and he actually works for Brantford and the Leafs. And this guy's awesome. So I asked him about Lardis and Vanacker and what he saw as the upside. He thinks of if Nick Lardis hits, he's going to be an incredible goal scorer, obviously, but he's going to be a top line player with Connor Bedard. Do you think you see that same upside with Nick Lardis as more of a top six player that brings that kind of super or like star contributor to the Blackhawks, in your opinion?
I think you hope he does.
Yeah.
I think you see a guy who was a third round pick, and immediately people were like, "Whoa, that's a steal!" And admittedly, I wasn't too versed on Nick Lardis when they picked him. I knew he had some high upside, but I think the size thing obviously was a factor in why he was a third round pick. But I know the style of the play is not exactly the same, but I'm getting Alex DeBrincat vibes from him where it's just like if he was 6 foot, he would have been maybe an early second round pick, late first. But just because he didn't have that size, like he fell. And then you see, the his year after his draft year, he has the injury that cuts it short, but he was 50 points in like 37 games, something like that. And then this past season, 71 goals. Like, I mean, you can't ignore that kind of scoring ability, even if with the caveat, oh, it's the OHL. Like, okay, but he's still 71 goals like that. What, 8 people have done that before? So that is really impressive. I do wonder how it will translate. I think this year in Rockford will be really telling because, in the OHL, he clearly had the green light to shoot, and the Blackhawks need somebody who is not afraid to just fire the puck and have confidence in their shot. He seems to have it. Is he going to be able to find the space and get that off at the AHL level? And if he can, I think that bodes well because the AHL is a more mucky game than the NHL. The NHL flows better, it flows faster. The guys at that level, they're they're supposed to be up there. They're up there for a reason. With the AHL, you kind of have this mix of, it's not as crisp of a game. But if you can find a style that works and be able to, make it work in the AHL, I don't have any doubts that he can make it translate to the NHL because he's a guy that can play fast, that he has the ability to find those open areas of the ice where, maybe he doesn't create his own space all that much because he doesn't have that big power forward size, but he can see the game really well. He can set up plays offensively really well, and he knows the right spots to be. So if he can do that, like I think the sky is the limit, but there's going to be a learning curve. I wouldn't be surprised if he plays all year in Rockford and then maybe gets a taste of the NHL at the end of the season. We'll see how it goes, but I think this year will be really important to see how some of those skills translate, especially as a guy that spent 3-4 seasons in the OHL.
Yeah, and he's actually really good friends with Michael Misa. So obviously, Scott Wheeler today on the Breakaway podcast with Charlie Romeliotis, he said that he kind of poured water on the Sharks taking Michael Misa. He said there's a chance that they look elsewhere. Obviously, he'd be a little surprised if they didn't, but they're not locked and loaded in Michael Misa. Especially if that's the case, the Blackhawks could potentially try to trade up. I mean, obviously they'll try
Maybe.
because Michael Misa is probably the perfect fit, but I'm not going to get or Blackhawks fans excited over that. But during the draft lottery, he commented under Lardis's post with a slot machine, and obviously they've grown up together. They were good friends, like so. It would just kind of like he would be locked and loaded top six with a Michael Misa, and obviously. Do you think that the Blackhawks there's an absolute or there's a chance that we could end up with Michael Misa, say give him the third and whatever else just to try to pick the best player available for us on our board?
Yeah, I think there's a way to get there. It's just if Kyle Davidson's willing to part with what would take to get up to one or two. And I think if you roll the dice and let things play out, let's say, you know, Schaefer goes number one to the Islanders, right? And if the Sharks were dead set on, we want Schaefer to fall because you look at their prospect pool, and having a defenseman of his caliber would be something that I would say that they are missing. Obviously, you use best player available, but if you don't have Schaefer, and if you're not bullish on Michael Misa, then yeah, I think you talk to the Hawks, and you say, okay, like, maybe that is when you look at it and you say, okay, Sharks, you were hoping to get the best defenseman. How about a pick swap and Kevin Korchinski or something like that? Then I think that that's where you kind of you talk about something like that where it satisfies their need. They don't really lose much out of it, and then the Hawks move up and satisfies the need that they have in their forward system, and you get the guy that is the best forward in the group. I think that's a scenario that could play out. I think you could get to one with the Islanders, and make sure that you get that top pick, so you don't have to hope that the Islanders take Schaefer or anything like that, and then it gets screwy. But I think there's a way to get there. I don't know exactly what it would take, and I'm not certain that Kyle Davidson is like really trying to get out, really like willing to do what it takes, if not more, to get there. And I think Misa's worth it. I just don't know if exactly it gets done. But it's not a 0% chance in my mind.
Yeah, and you brought up Kevin Korchinski, and he's somebody actually I was going to ask about next time. So, I mean, we're in the same wavelength right here with Kevin Korchinski. When do you think that the when do you think that the Blackhawks organization would worry about Kevin Korchinski, and do you think that it would get to a point where they trade him off before that happens?
I don't tend to think that Davidson and his group is too impatient. I think if anything, they're overly patient. So I think for the organization to worry about Kevin Korchinski, it would probably take more than another year of like, needing to progress and play in Rockford. Like if he plays this entire season in Rockford, I think the fan base is going to get really, squirrely about it. But I wouldn't imagine that Davidson and that group would be worried about it. But what I would say is that if Korchinski doesn't take that next step this season, and he was thrown into the NHL as a rookie, and sink or swim, he swam sometimes, he sunk sometimes. It was fine for a rookie defenseman. Goes to Rockford, finds his game, has a really good season, looks like an improved player at the NHL level when he was up in Chicago. And we've seen guys before take that extra time and those extra steps in Rockford. Alex Vlasic did it. Wyatt Kaiser did it. So there's two young defensemen that Korchinski can look at and say, okay, like the path is not always linear. But I think if he's in Rockford again for another full season, and if it feels like he's plateaued, then I think for him, he kind of has to worry like, okay, well, what is Levshinov doing? What is Renzel doing? What is Nolan Allen and Ethan Del Mastro and Kaiser? Like, what are they all doing in their season this year? Am I going to get leapfrogged? Like, am I going to become the guy that is like, 5 or 6 on the list rather than 2 or 3, depending on who you ask? But I don't think the organization would get worried about it. I think they're going to be patient with it with all these guys. But I think I personally would have a little bit of like to see a little bit more, because he is a guy from the 22 draft class that Renzel I think is going to be in the NHL all year. Nazar is definitely going to be in the NHL all year. And I think you look at some of those guys from that same class and you're like, okay, well, 2 of those 3 first rounders are in the NHL. Like you start looking at Korchinski and you're like, you were the first of the 3. Like you kind of hope that he starts to take that next step.
Yeah, if you look at the NHL draft in 2022 a little differently, where Nazar is 7, Rinzel's 13, and Korchinski's 25, it looks a lot better. I mean, Kyle Davidson got absolute steals, taking the first high school player in a long time for the Blackhawks, and he obviously hit. Sam Rinzel looks like he could be the number 1 defenseman for a very long time, with up there with Alex Vlasic. Like, do you think the Blackhawks have 2 top pair right-handed defensemen on their roster now, with Artem Levshinov, obviously, and Sam Rinzel?
I mean, yeah, I think both of those guys have that capability, have that ceiling for sure. Um, I think they would probably get there in different paths, because I think Renzel, I don't want to say he's more polished, But definitely Levshinov is a little bit it's a little bit harder to read his game. But I think if you look at it compared to where he played in Rockford, where he played in how he played in Rockford, how he played in Chicago, kind of like I said, like about when we were talking about Lardis, like the AHL game is different than the NHL. Some guys are really good in the AHL, doesn't translate to the NHL. Some guys it's the opposite. And Levshinov, I think at the beginning of the AHL season, you could see that it was a little bit of a struggle, a little bit of a learning curve there, but he got there. But then when he got up to the NHL, you were like, oh, okay, now we're seeing it. Now we see exactly, what the Hawks saw for him to be at number two. You saw those flashes in the NHL, and his game just kind of the pace of it felt better at the NHL level. With Renzel, I mean, obviously he jumped right in and played 24 minutes a night, something like that for
Yeah.
for at the end of the season, and played really well. So, I just take your pick out of the two of them who could be that top line right-handed guy. But yeah, I would definitely say they have two guys that could play that role, and I think it might be easier to see Renzel do that. But I mean, I'm not counting out Levshinov at all.
Yeah. So obviously Rinzel is more polished, but he was also drafted 2 years before. And what
Right.
Artem
Yeah.
Levshinov is doing, going from Belarus, USHL to NCAA to AHL to the NCAA or to NHL in 3 years is absolutely fantastic. So I agree with you completely. Um, Artie is a lot rawer, but that means that he just has more upside. You saw what he did with Colorado. And obviously there's a player like Lucas Reichel who wasn't drafted by this regime, but do you think a play like a coach like Sorensen will be able to give Reichel more time this year and try to help him develop as he played really well under him in the AHL when he had when he was over a point per game player? Because we have Jeff Blashill now, do you think that that will help Lucas Reichel and the young players having a coach like Blashill and Sorensen on the assistant roster?
Yeah, I think the move to keep Anders Sorensen and keep him in the NHL is a good continuity move in the scope that you're going to have a young roster and you're going to have a lot of guys that have a relationship with him. So he's a good like middleman to have on that coaching staff between the new guys and especially Blashill and the young guys that are going to be, trying to buy into the system. So, you kind of have a guy in Sorensen that they all have a relationship with, whether it's been playing with them in Rockford or in Chicago or, just through development camps, like getting to know him that way. Like he's definitely a good development coach to have there for those young guys. And then, specifically to Reichel, like I think what we've heard from Blashill in the times that he's spoke, his press conference, we had him on the CHGO Blackhawks show, like he seems like a guy that the accountability is going to be there. And with Reichel, I think there were times where, maybe he was unfairly, scratched or didn't have, given opportunities. But there are other times where it was just like, dude, we need way more out of you. And he could show it in flashes, but it was just inconsistency. So I think for Reichel, it's a contract year. There's a lot of talent coming up behind him. So, his spot is not as guaranteed as it may have looked 2 seasons ago. So I think with Blashill, there's going to be that accountability. And I think too, he's gonna preach a style of hockey that I don't think we've seen Lucas Reichel play consistently. Where he obviously categorizes it as winning hockey. But being able to make sure that you win battles and do the little things right to have that stack up to bigger opportunities, and not just going into not just going into battles with a 50-50 chance of either I get a breakaway or they get a breakaway kind of thing. And he's really not going to allow that to fly. And I think Lucas Reichel has an opportunity to grow. I think he still has a really good skill set that can translate to, being a scoring option, being a middle six guy. It's just the consistency has to be there. And I think last year being on the fourth line, being around Pat Maroon a lot, hopefully rubbed off on him on the details of the game and what life is as a fourth liner. And it's not that glamorous. You don't get a lot of shifts. You don't get a lot of, great opportunities to go out there and make something happen. And I think Reichel's a guy that wants to play that way. So you got to earn it. And I think Blashill's going to make him do that.
I wanted to ask you about CHGO because you guys get to interview incredible guests and you guys do a fantastic job. That I've been watching you on that show for years.
Nice.
And, have you ever been shell shocked or been like, oh my God? I know you had the multiple mystery guests and they had 4 Stanley Cups combined a couple of days ago, which was
Yeah,
sick. But have you ever been shell shocked?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we had Marian Hossa on when it was the lead up to his number retirement. And that was the first time that I had been around anybody of that caliber outside of like, being in a locker room or anything in a locker room setting, like a press or anything like that. And um to just sit there and before the show and after the show, just to be able to kind of like just chat with him
Mhm.
was surreal. And like there right before we're getting on the show, I'm just talking with them and I'm just like, do you've been out of the game for a little bit and you had arguably some of your most memorable years in Chicago. Like, do you go back and reminisce about that at all? Like, do you watch old YouTube clips or anything like that? Because people like us, like we do that all the time. And he goes, and he was saying, yeah, I'll go on YouTube sometimes and you know I'll get suggestions for like things my kids have been watching stuff, and then I'll get suggestions for like 2010 Blackhawks Stanley Cup highlights and stuff, and I was just like, so YouTube is suggesting your highlights to you, and he was like, yeah, I guess so. It was just kind of like a fun just like little like off the camera conversation, but yeah, I mean it just you have to still like for me like I never thought that I'd actually be in a position to talk to Marian Hossa in that setting. And having been able to do that with Hossa, we had Duncan Keith on a couple weeks ago. We've talked to Corey Crawford. Dave Bolin was yesterday. Like it's just crazy that there are times that I just kind of have to like pinch myself. And now it's the shell shock feeling kind of isn't as intense because I've been able to do it a number of times, but I still like take a step back and put myself in my brain 10
8-year-old self.
12 years ago, and be like, hey, you and Duncan Keith, your all-time favorite Blackhawk, are going to be sitting on lounge chairs and just chatting for for 30 minutes or something, and I'd slap myself, be like, yeah, right. So it is still really cool. It's one of those things that like throughout all the jobs that I've had and experiences I had, I'm really grateful, and I always have to just like pinch myself. Like, the stuff that I've been able to do, like it's crazy that I call it like my job compared to what other people do. It's wild.
Yeah, that's awesome and very surreal. And I know you guys get Vlasic on weekly. And my question is like, do you think Vlasic is going to be the next captain of the Blackhawks? And who?
Uh, you know, if it's not Connor Bedard, he'd be. I think Vlasic would be a great candidate for it. I mean, it seems like he. It's funny. He just turned 24, but he seems like a veteran amongst the young guys out there that especially that are going to be on the team next year. Like he's going to be one of the most um grizzled vets that you could say. And he holds himself really well. I think he's really well liked in the fan base. I think he's really well liked in the organization. His teammates seem to respect him, and I think he does a really good job of like being able to connect not only with his peers but also he talked about last year like Alec Martinez was his best friend on the team who's 13 years older than he is.
Yeah, that's
So being
crazy.
able to kind of be able to connect and with veterans, older guys, younger guys, like I think he's a really good candidate to be able to kind of be that voice in the room. But what's great about the group of young guys coming up here, this new era of Hawks hockey that's going to be you know coming this year, next year, so on and so forth, is you have a lot of guys that have been in leadership positions. You have a lot of high character guys, and they all seem to get along really well. And it does kind of remind me, going back, of those cup teams where, if Brent Seabrook or Duncan Keith or Marion Hossa or Patrick Sharp, if they were on any other teams, they're probably captains. And they're all guys that, were capable of, being a voice in the room, or being, a leader by example, or whatever it needed to be. Like, they all had that ability to do that, and respect around the room, and be able to, rally their group together. And I see a lot of that with these young guys so far. Like, I really feel like you said, Vlasic is a guy that feels like he can do that. Frank Nazar has that personality for sure. I think Connor Bedard is a guy that, face of your franchise. Like, he feels like he's going to be the captain at some point. Whether it's right after Foligno, or maybe they give it, some more time to breathe, who knows? But it really feels like Bedard is probably going to be that guy. And he's not the most vocal, but he definitely is the example of the work ethic that I think the organization wants the young guys amongst their peers to look at and be like, look, Bedard's putting in the work in the offseason. He's putting in the work, before practice, after practice. Like, he is so focused on hockey, and they want the guys to kind of follow that. And we saw that since he's been here, how, Reichel and Kershev and Korchinski and, Vlasic, like all those guys, Nolan Allen, like, they would be the last guys off the ice because they all collectively together would be working after practices. So I think you're seeing that, and I think there's a lot of guys that have those qualities, but it's going to be exciting to see them, start to grow together and see who comes out as like the leading voice. Because even those teams before, the cup teams of years ago, Brent Seabrook, he was at times part of the leadership group that wore letters. Sometimes he wasn't, but he always was a leader. He always had a voice in the locker room. And probably, if it wasn't Jonathan Toews, it might have been Brent Seabrook who was captain. And there are guys that can be leaders without just having to, wear a letter.
That was an awesome, awesome, just like answer to my question. I did not expect that. And my last question, because Ben Pope said no to this, so I really want to know, do you think Connor Bedard wins a Stanley Cup with the Blackhawks?
Well, Ben's not a fan of the Blackhawks. So,
That's true.
we've seen how hard it is to win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
Connor McDavid has been to 2 in the last back-to-back season, and still has 0 on his mantle. So it's really hard to do it. I want to say yes, because I want to live in that world. I want to live in that world where Connor Bedard is the number 1 pick. He is the leader of that next generation of Blackhawks hockey. And he's the guy that gets them, is part of the group that gets them to that top of the NHL again. And I just, maybe it's too optimistic, or, maybe it's too much belief in, the rebuild plan or whatever. But I think I want to say yes, because I think I believe in this group that's being put together. I still think, obviously, there's lots of work to be done. There's still more pieces to the puzzle to fall into place. But I think you get Bedard. You look at some of the guys that he's he was compared to, or is compared to: McDavid, McKinnon, Crosby, Ovechkin. Like, he's put in those same breaths. 3 of those guys have cups with the teams that drafted them. So, I'd like to think that the odds are in Bedard's favor, that, a guy at that skill level, a guy that has that kind of potential, paired with an organization that just recently, in 15 to 10 years ago, knows what it takes to get to that point, and is committed to doing that. They're not an organization that's just going to, sit there in mediocrity. They're not the Bulls. They're not the White Sox. Like, yeah, I know the Wirtz and Reindorf family are very close in friendships, but I think they operate differently. So I think the Blackhawks, they're an organization that knows what it means to be successful in Chicago, and what kinds of legends you can create by, making the choices and sacrifices it takes and spending the money it takes and doing what it takes to compete and be at the top. So I'd like to think Bedard is a guy that is going to lift the cup with the Blackhawks and live up to the expectations that, you know, kind of were put on him as soon as the Hawks started tanking and won the draft lottery a few years ago.
Yeah, that's the clip right there. That gets me fired up. And thank you so much for coming on. This is like a hot one episode. So there's cameras here, here, and here. Tell everybody what you're working on and where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find the work all at CHGO Blackhawks. You can follow us on Twitter at CHGO_Blackhawks. My written work and Jay's written work can be found at allchgo.com. You can listen to our podcasts on all major podcast networks and on YouTube as well. You can follow me at Mario_Terabasi on Twitter. Search my name on Blue Sky, you'll find me. And yeah, I mean, it's appreciate the opportunity to be on the show and to chat, and hope to do it again soon.
Yeah, for sure. And one more thing, because Jay wanted me to ask you about the day that you found out you were gluten free.
Oh, okay. I mean, how many details do you want?
I don't know what he was he just said to ask you.
Oh gosh. Okay, so the short and family friendly version of the story is um I had some periods of time where, eating regular bread, drinking like a Miller Lite or something, I'd get bloated, my stomach would hurt. And so I was like, you know what? Let me cut back on regular breads and stuff like that. And I did, and I felt better. And so then I was just like, okay, like maybe I just needed a break from it. Started to cycle it back in a little, and I was like, okay, it's going all right, whatever. I go to an Ice Hogs Admirals game with my buddy, and just as fans bought tickets and everything, and had like a chicken sandwich, tacos, chicken tender. Like I ate a lot, and plenty of beverages, and he was driving home, so don't worry. And I get home, and when I tell you that I was in the bathroom for the next 36 hours, I couldn't believe how sick I got. And I was just like, it had to be all of the bread and the breading and the beer and everything. And so I cut it out from there. And there have been one or two times where I've had some emergencies. One time was on a show, so that was a interesting experience. But yeah, I mean it was rough. So that definitely gave me the indication that gluten was going to be my enemy. So, but I mean, it's you hear it from Jay, a guy who hosts a show called the I'm Fat podcast. So it's not a mystery that he enjoys all types of food, and you hear from him like, oh, gluten free, that must be so bad. It's really not. Like there are so many options for gluten-free breads and pasta and pizza. Like I made sausages on my new grill and had them on a bun and all the toppings, and I do sandwiches. Like it's the gluten-free world has expanded, and from the tropes of, well, you just must be eating something that tastes like cardboard. Like nah, like they're pretty good. And Alex Vlasic is gluten-free too, so him and I are like basically best friends. So
Yeah, I ate on a gluten-free diet for 3 years in high school, and there was no like the food was awesome. Like you can eat a lot
yeah,
of things. So I just wanted to ask that because Jay told me to. But thank you so much. It
great
was a
setup.
pleasure. Yeah, like and subscribe just for that story, and I'm gonna link everything Mario does in the description because he's a wonderful, wonderful follow. So thank you so much, everybody.